ready whenever you guys are.
Kick things off, Emma.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get cracking into it now that Angus is caffeinated for the morning. Welcome everyone to tonight's virtual tasting. I'm super excited to dive in personally. I feel like I've missed quite a few sponge tastings recently, so I'm keen to get back into it. We've got an awesome array of decadent drinks, drams. Try saying that 3 times fast. Including the new Westie Sponge Ledaig, which I have actually been buzzing to try. I cannot wait. And I'll be trying it possibly for the first time alongside all of you, which is very exciting. And I believe Ollie mentioned in one of the emails is our second to last tasting to include the Whisky Sponge series. Now that it's officially hit bottle 100. I can't wait. Has that landed in Australia yet, Ollie, or it's inbound?
Next week, I think.
Next week? I'll be counting the days. I read the specs up on it and it is up my alley flavor wise. So I'll probably be nabbing a bottle for myself, which I'm looking forward to. And I love the fact that it's a super accessible, 7-year-old ardent American to finish it off. It's none of this crazy gatekeeping, crazy expensive final release. That is absolutely on brand, I think, for Sponge. So yeah, super excited about that. Obviously, as you guys saw before, we're joined by Angus again tonight. Thank you so much for joining on what's a busy work morning for you. I know you've been fondling some barley this morning, I think, or recently for your distillery. So I know you've got that busy time ahead. But before we get underway and I hand over to Angus to tell you about the drams we're trying, just the usual housekeeping. We recommend having 6 glasses so you can go back and compare if you've got the glassware for it. Don't worry if you don't, I never do. As usual, please don't drive after. These whiskies are almost all cask strength, bar one. So obviously we encourage responsible drinking. All of our tastings are recorded as well for those who want to watch them back or who are unable to join us tonight. They're up on our YouTube channel, so like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And there's also a brand article in the featured brands section of the website if you're more old school and want to read about the brand further. Please pop any tasting notes, questions in chat. I particularly love tasting notes. I love what you guys are picking up on it. And I'll do my best to get any answers for questions if possible. I think that's about it from my end. I might hand it over to Angus to start us off with the first whiskey of the night. We're starting with the Equinox and Solstice Mortlach 16-year-old, which is a pretty decent age. I think, is this the highest age Equinox bottling you've done so far?
I think so. I think it's maybe the equal highest. I've got them all next to me. I can probably tell. Yeah. I think we did. Yeah. No, it is. It is the highest age. Yeah, because the other ones have been 15-year-olds.
Mm.
So yes, this was our most recent Equinox and Solstice bottling from summer this year, and it was a pretty obvious pick when it was from the recent conversation with Signatory about what bits and pieces they might have available this year. And I looked at a whole bunch of cask samples actually, and this was the one that really struck me as being an obvious selection, an obvious place in our release calendar, and it was, immediately Equinox and Solstice juice to me in terms of price point and mainly in terms of the character and the quality. I think it's always nice when you get distilleries that have a quite sort of familiar association with sherry, which Mortlach tends to do, and then you get something that goes the other way and goes totally refill, and you get a really nice natural naked take on the underlying distillate. And I think Mortlach is a distillery which is still very much about distillate character in the sense that it famously makes this kind of 2.5 times distilled but quite fat and heavy and often described as meaty. I'm not sure I get that character too much from this example, but what I definitely get is the sense of a really lovely, unvarnished, honest, easy, quite satisfyingly full-on Speyside malt whiskey profile and a nice take on that underlying Mortlach character in a way that I think is just really delicious and fits well with the ethos of the brand, which is about being easy drinking, evocative of a season, pleasurable, humble, simple drinking malt whiskey. So I hope we've achieved that with this Mortlach bottling. And I think, yeah, even some nice comments coming through. So yeah, hopefully you enjoy it. Again, this is another one that where we do this series always at 48.5%. So this to me is kind of like where I think the perfect sweet spot is for drinking strength that retains a bit of power. That's the whole sort of principle behind 48.5%.
Yeah,
What do
100%.
people think? There seems to be some good comments coming in.
Yeah, I think Leo and Tim both agree on barley sugar as on the nose. Honey and perfume as well. Michael says it's really bright and vibrant on the nose. I'm getting a bit of like, when you do like because obviously it's a summer edition, you have like a nice picnic in the park and you've got the grass and whatnot, and then someone brings like one of those really fancy French bries that like barely smells of cheese, but like it's there. So those very clean brie cheese smells, I think, is what I'm getting.
I definitely find that more and more people are talking about cheese and tasting notes in whiskey. And I don't know if this means that Scotch whiskey has just generally become cheesier, or that we as a culture are starting to cross over. The Venn diagram of whiskey and cheese fanaticism are starting to merge into one single orb, which definitely makes sense. I mean, I love cheese and whiskey. And I do notice it, like we talked about it with our Bruichladdich bottling. We always talk about it with Fettcairn. Can spread this Mortlach on toast. I mean, yeah, it is quite thick, syrupy whiskey. Pancakes would probably be a good option for it. Breakfast pancakes with a drizzle of Mortlach, Equinox, and Solstice. There you go. Responsible drinking. Sorry,
Yeah.
I've been unwell this week, so we did a big launch on Thursday, and then immediately did a sort of 3-day festival on the trot afterwards, and that basically kind of destroyed me. So I'm a broken man.
Yeah, I think something's been going around in Australia as well, but I told my husband before we head over to Scotland and to Europe, I'm like, we're getting every vaccination under the sun. I do not want to be sick on this trip at all. But yeah, you can run yourself ragged. So, and I hear the
Can't be
weather's really
vaccinated
nice.
against Scottishness. It'll
Yeah.
fade away.
There's no hope for that. No hope for that at all. But yeah, Ranjan has a really good one. Typical Mortlach profile, spicy, buttery, creamy, long finish. Yeah, Mortlach is like, because what they call it, the beast of Duffton, right?
Yeah, that's what it's been historic. It's got this sort of reputation, and I don't know. I don't always find it in refill examples. And this one, I think it's more goes towards like sort of waxy and oily rather than meaty. I think often people think about meatiness really, and that's coming from sherry casks, and the combination of this type of distillate with sherry generates more of this kind of like gamey beef stock kind of vibe. And it's also a lot to do with the type of sherry cask. Whereas actually, I think probably fatness and heaviness and fullness of body and oiliness and texture and waxiness are probably more suitable descriptors to talk about it when you're looking at just refill examples like this one.
Yeah, I've always kind of personally found that Mortlach aligns very similarly with Linkwood in the way that they respond. I think like Linkwood has that similar, it's more of an oiliness than a fattiness though, if that makes sense. It's like an orange oil rather than a bacon fat, kind of.
Never really known what to make of Linkwood. It's in like my sort of top most boring distilleries probably in terms of like I just don't have an opinion on it. I don't know what to think about it. It's maybe why we've never bottled one. Not that I'm against it. I suppose I've just never had many Linkwoods that have found super inspiring or particularly striking in terms of charisma. I don't know. It's just one of Diageo. It's that like little nest of distilleries that Diageo have, which just are sort of core blending fodder material. That's why conversely, why I always quite liked Mortlach, because it felt like it sat outside that and had quite a lot of personality, even in this day and age where a lot of these big old classic distilleries have had a fair bit of personality ironed out of them. It managed to hold on to it. margarine notes. Nice.
Yeah, Ollie says liquid at cask strength in ex-bourbon can be really good, but yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
you have to
in
find the
some
right
of the
one.
work I do on the tasting panel at the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, we try a lot of younger, just bourbon cask examples of distilleries like this, and there's hardly any are ever bad. Most, almost all of them sit at a certain level of quality, and you know that's an achievement of sort of modern whiskey making. Uh, and I can well imagine many liquids sitting in that kind of profile and bracket and level of quality.
Mm,
Um, so
yeah,
this is it's an interesting one this to start with because I think it'll be a good one to compare to dram number two. So we could maybe start doing a little bit of looking at dram number two, which is the Deanston.
yeah,
Uh,
100%.
we did this as a web exclusive mainly. Obviously, we sold you guys some as well. And this was, I had actually other plans for this. This was almost going to be an Equinox and Solstice bottling at one point. But then we looked at the cask in a bit more detail and did a fresh regauge on it and realized there was only about 100 bottles of whiskey in it. And I had a look at the sample again and realized it's actually really pretty tasty. So we just did it as a single cask strength, and I thought 101 bottles. That's the only thing that makes sense is just to do it as an exclusive bottling and just sell it directly ourselves. So that's by and large what we did a web exclusive. And I was really chuffed with this one because I've been looking for a Deanston for a while. Um, and a lot of what the distillery does with Deanston seems to be in quite wacky woods and sort of silly woods. And I think that's a bit of a shame because I really like Deanston. Modern Deanston is a story of a whiskey which has improved, I think, quite consistently since it was created. So it was built in 67, and it's one of these ones where the modern ones are just definitely better than the older ones, which is usually the inverse in my experience. And so I was always looking for a nice example of Deanston. Got this humble little first fill barrel, and super chuffed with it. And then tried it when it first came out, when we first got the bottle, opened one, and I thought, yeah, this is as expected, very good. Happy with that. And then didn't think about it for a while, and then revisited it again, the same bottle that had been open for a few weeks. Revisited it at the Fringe Festival this past weekend. Was had it as like a little under the counter selection. I was pouring for a few folk, and someone pointed out to me like, "This Deanston's really fucking good." And like, oh yeah, it's actually really really good. It reminds me of some like old Rosebanks a little bit, in that it's quite full and it's got this kind of buttery, malty richness, but also quite bright citrus notes, white fruit, even grappa-esque kind of grassy olive oil notes. There's a lot going on there that I find something new each time I go back to it. So I'm really chuffed with this Deanston. I think it's a little bit of a sleeper hit. There's been no reviews or anything of it yet, but I hope that over time more and more people will maybe notice it, and lots of people that bought one because it wasn't expensive. Bought one will crack it and try it. Um, yeah. So again, so true notes of Deanston new make here. So again, that I agree with that comment. I think that sort of points towards the fact that you get quite a lovely raw, unvarnished take on Deanston sort of au naturel as it is as a malt whiskey in its own right, without any kind of over or wacky wood influence. And even though this is a first fill barrel with only 100 bottles, it doesn't feel like it's got too much vanilla or creaminess or sort of woodiness from the cask. It feels like it's a barrel that's given it a reasonably light touch, although there does feel like a certain amount of concentration has happened in the spirit. And that's where I think some of these lovely, rather more syrupy, fruity things come from. Someone talking about Kleinleash vibes, totally get that. Like unripe bananas. Yeah, I remember getting that as well. So yeah,
It's
nice
super cool.
variety of different comments coming in, which is cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of tasting notes in the chat, which I always think is a great indicator of like a whiskey that not befuddles, but like intrigues people's brain. It scratches that itch where you're like, what is that note? What is that note? I'm getting like papadums on the nose, that like really clean, chickpea kind of thing where it's like creamy but still a little bit savory. Travis is getting shortbread. Yeah, Michael Kutsukos, amazing flavors, quick, sharp, and astringent. Travis was wondering where you got the cask. Did you get it directly from the Deanston guys, or?
No, this was just part of a random purchase from a broker.
So,
Don't generally talk about where we get supply from in any great specific detail, but we cast a wide net, and it's very rare that we'll deal with a distillery directly on cask purchasing it in this way. When we deal with distilleries directly, it's more with ones that will work with us on a bottling, very much like what we did with Ardent American for WhiskySponge 100. So yeah, no, this was just sort of looking at a list and saying, this looks like it might be good. Let's go with that. So
lucky pick, or a great nab. Yeah, it's so like so much more characterful than 12 years might indicate that it would be. It feels a lot more complex than that.
I definitely think blind, it's one of those whiskies where you could go anywhere between like 8 to 18 years in term, and you know, not be too surprised. I think it has that kind of ethereal combination of maturity and freshness at the same time, complexity, but also a bit of power as well. So it's modulating on all these different levels, which is one of the reasons why I like it, and one of the things that I think is a hallmark of a really good whiskey is that it can shelter multiple facets of like quite strong personality at the same time, which perhaps on paper might not make sense, but when you taste it, it's like, oh, it does make sense. It works. Yeah, no, I'm
So
really, really pleased with this.
yeah, no, you should be. Leo says it's super well balanced, drinks well below a 57% offering. Ranjan's got a really good call, which is like bergamot oils. Definitely get that like lovely like perfume, a bit of honeysuckle as well on the palate. So this was a web exclusive release, was it?
Yeah, so we did this, just put it up on the website, and yeah, I think one or two customers such as yourselves got a little bit of stock, but it was predominantly just sold directly on the website. Having we've got quite a few customers now around the world, and when you get low out turns like this, it just doesn't really, it's hard to make it make sense. So either you split it up between, you do it exclusively for a customer, or split it between a couple of customers, or do it online. And we'd been looking for something as an exclusive for the shop for a while, and this made sense. So it just sort of fell into place, and went ahead and did it. And yeah, no, I'm glad we did. I mean, it's sold out before, as I said, mentioned before any reviews or anything have really hit. So I'm hopeful that it'll be a bottling that people go back to and revisit and sort of discover a little bit. And I hope some of them, I know for a fact some have ended up in bars. So hopefully it's something that, a fair few people will get to taste over the years.
Yeah, 100%. Well, speaking of bars, I might shuffle onto conveniently the next whiskey in the lineup.
Nice segue.
Yeah, look, I try, okay? I do
You're a
my
pro.
best.
You're a pro.
So I think the last sponge tasting was just before the Elysian bar launch for this Ollie. Is that correct? Yeah. So I think yeah, we had an event at the Elysian in Melbourne, along with a couple of other sponge decadent drinks whiskies on pour, which my favorite part was, it's like, oh yeah, you're running a tasting. I'm like, cool. Wait, what? Like 3 or 4 days before the event. It's like, oh, okay. Let me like grab out all my notes to talk about all these other whiskeys before we get to the one everyone wanted to try, which was this. So yeah, tell us how this kind of fell across your lap, this whiskey.
So we bought a very large, very full, very alcoholic butt of 2013 Ben Nevis. And this Ben Nevis was good. It was pretty distillate driven. and in the sense it spent its whole life in this big refill butt, and it's like 600 litre beast of a thing. It must have been like a third or fourth fill butt, and so it was a very kind of neutral but still mature enough. It was just like a classic 10-year-old without too much wood influence, and a lot of the classic heavier characteristics of Ben Nevis had been kind of magnified and brought to the fore. So there was nice background sweetness, but a lot of like really like greasy, mechanical, um, rather brutal West Highland sort of Hessian trouser, muddy boot, dirty distillery vibe. You know, it was like if you could have buried this cask in the ground and started a Ben Nevis dunder pit. Um, it was a beast. So I thought, what could we do with this enormous, vast, monolithic butt of Ben Nevis? And at the time, I'd been chatting to someone separately about some quarter casks. I was looking for some refill quarter casks and I thought this is a perfect opportunity to try this out. So we decanted this butt equally into 425-litre quarter casks, and these were refill quarter casks, so they weren't they've been used for a number of years. So I suppose there's still a more activity in that wood, but not aggressive activity. I'm really afraid of using, or really against using, kind of ideologically, very fresh new casks, unless we buy some sherry casks, which we might do in the next sort of couple of years or so. We might start to do stuff like that. That's a separate thing. But you know, buying in a load of brand new oak STRs or whatever, or other people do that very well. It's not my scene. If I do re-racks or finishes or whatever, I like to play around with lighter touch wood in a way which is just like teasing something out of the distillate itself and just gently sculpting or gently rounding off character which is already existent. So we re-racked them into these quarter casks. We left quite a bit of headspace inside each one because the liquid in the butt evenly distributed meant they weren't entirely full. And two of them we started reducing in stages in ABV. The ABV was originally about 66%, and we started bringing that down in stages, and that became 10-year-old Ben Nevis as WhiskySponge edition 85, I think. Yeah, so WhiskySponge 85 was the first bottling of that. And then I ended up starting to talk to you guys. This bottling, I think, did well with you guys, and then started talking to you about exclusives. And then it just became, I didn't have a use for these other two quarters at that time. So they became part of that conversation. And that's how you guys have ended up with the first of these two quarters.
You want to give people a hint what's coming up with the other one?
Well, yes. So the Deanston you just tried, the final quarter cask, the fourth quarter cask, was found to be leaking slightly in the warehouse. So we thought, well, we'll just have to move it. So that has now been re-racked into the empty Deanston barrel from the bottling we just tasted. So it's had quite a journey, this Ben Nevis, jumping from refill quarter cask, and now into a second fill ex Deanston barrel, which I think will make none of which will hurt it. I think, these have all been good, not excessive casks, which will all preserve this Ben Nevis character. But it will probably give some interesting differentiation when the sequel to this bottling makes its way to the Oz market. So this one, which I haven't tasted since a cask sample, is essentially like WhiskySponge edition 85, but with several more months sitting in the refill quarter cask. So this is just a single refill quarter cask on its own now, and reduced to the same bottling strength, 57.1, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. I should really know. But yes, 57.1. And as I recall, this was really just going a little bit more towards a kind of fuller, rounded profile. And you guys can tell me, but I recall this one being like a little bit waxier, a little bit creamier, and the cask starting to move it away a little bit more from that kind of mechanical, greasy side. Although I expect that is still probably the dominant force in this whiskey, is that kind of heavier, oilier, more industrial side of Ben Nevis. But I think the cask is starting to add in some interesting kind of underlying oily, spicy, more like grassy olive oil, classical waxy characteristics. So it's really going to be interesting. And then what will be really interesting is eventually to do the final bottling and see how far that has drifted from WhiskySponge edition 85 in terms of the evolution of all these like subtle cask influences and changes. Overall, though, I love these bottlings because they are like really classic distillate forward whiskies. They're big, rugged, beastly, unvarnished, unashamed, out and proud Ben Nevis, modern West Highland full-bodied malt whiskey. People talk about things like Lafroig, Lagavulin being challenging whiskies, but I think if you like the flavor of peat, you like those whiskies. To me, whiskies like this, like Oban, these are more like complicated, challenging, difficult whiskies for people to get their heads around. If you give this whiskey to sort of a novice early on in their journey, there's a good chance you could derail someone's whiskey enjoyment permanently, or at least for a very long time, because this is a whiskey which could be arguably quite challenging. For those of us that are a bit further along and like big, chunky, chewy, powerful malt whiskies, then this is great. This is sort of whiskey I absolutely love. And, as I've mentioned many times before, it's charismatic, distillate-driven whiskies, which are my kind of favorite thing, is what my passion is in whiskey. And doing big, chunky, challenging bottlings like this that are, characterful whiskies that can be quite extreme and can provoke opinion and discussion. That is also what I think of Decadent Drinks. Our kind of purpose, our house style as a bottler is sometimes is to sort of source and find and put out stuff like this. So yeah, I hope you like it.
Yeah, it's super cool. It's one of those, like, I love the idea that there's going to be a couple of sibling Nevises in across the range coming up, which is really cool. But yeah, it's definitely that thing of like, it's not smoke, it's not the things you expect, it's that funk, but it's not quite sulfur. And yes, it's super cool. I mean, Leo says classic Ben Nevis oiliness, but sweet and approachable. Tim says the nose is just pure excitement. He loves a salty, savory, sweet, eclectic, funky mix. I personally got like a pistachio or cashew cream from it as well. Justin asked a question which as well a little bit. What's your preference, first fill or refill to get and then potentially to use as well?
Always historically, my preference is good distillate in refill wood for sufficient amount of time. And that can be 5 years, or it can be, 20 years, and often even longer. But that's kind of my favorite profile of whiskey, is whiskies that are just, and it's something that you can't capture in any other way other than really good distillate, refill wood, leave for sufficient amount of time, which is what makes it such a compelling thing, because it can only be arrived at through, a long wait and a lots of patience. Or it's also really compelling because if you have a 5-year-old young whiskey that's just been in refill wood and it's still or already amazing, that is a really like mind-blowing thing. That to me is showing that you've made something in distillate form, which is, a bit of a work of art. And that's what a lot of these really old, young, high strength single malts from decades gone by that, that inspired me they had that kind of characteristic and that sense of like astonishment and wow factor. A few questions here. How much time did the Ben Nevis spend? Quarter cask. So this one I think was about 8 months, 8 or 9 months, I think. So not super long. Will Kythe use refill wood only? No, we will use first fill sherry hogsheads as well, and some butts, but the wood will be quite old, although they will technically be first fill sherry hogsheads, in the sense they'll be the first time they'd be used for maturing Scotch whisky. We will use quite a big amount of a mix of refill barrels and refill hogsheads, and we will use a proportion, probably a bigger proportion in the early years, of first fill barrels. And as time goes on and we become more confident in the type of distillate we're making and we understand our distillate more and we've decided to, we've honed in on a style we know works and we're making that consistently, that we will probably transition a bit more lopsidedly towards bigger proportions of refill, smaller proportions of first fill. We'll always maintain a proportion of first fill, but the objective is not to be a single cask business, single cask distillery. We will do some single casks, but the first fill barrel component of that stock, that maturing stock portfolio, is really there for blending in. It's there for balancing out with some refills and creating a bottling which is more than the sum of its parts. That's the objective. That's the sort of plan at the moment. Obviously things may change, but we've got no plans to be filling any wine casks, any weird casks, any funky casks, anything like that.
I was going to say Angus is slowly going around playing I guess whiskey industry bingo. He's been a tour guide, whiskey auctioneer, reviewer, independent bottler. Now he's becoming a distiller, so he's just working through the list.
I hadn't thought of it like that. Yeah. I don't know what's next after doing distilling. I don't know. Consulting. I've sort of done that, not in any like big meaningful way. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll just go back to working in a shop. That would be less stressful, I feel. So yeah, generally positive comments on the Ben Nevis.
Yeah. Justin says it's a very good Ben Nevis. Tim, another dram that drinks dangerously below its ABV. Michael Kotsuko says this has been my favorite by a long way so far. I mean, we've got some pretty exciting ones coming up, so who knows? But yeah, it's pretty good. Leo says he tasted Ben Nevis 10-year-old in a pub in Fort William 5 years ago, and that was the start of your whiskey odyssey. It's a good way to get started.
Definitely. Yeah.
We often hear it's people's favorite Japanese Scotch.
Yeah. Well, a lot of Japanese whiskey is Ben Nevis, so yeah.
The label we were sharing earlier, so each of the Australian releases, that was the second one we've done. We feature someone in the local Australian whiskey industry, usually bartenders who have supported the Decedent Drinks brand. So the first one we did was an Ardmore, which featured the team at Whiskey and Element. This Ben Nevis featured Kelvin and Yao at the Elysium Whiskey Bar. So Scott's hitting up probably one of the Sydney bars next, probably on the list, but there's a few other bars and people in the industry here supporting it. So we'll see whose face gets on the next bottle.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously we're happy to support any amount of piss taking or nonsense or celebration as seen necessary. So just let us know when the time comes to do the next one.
Scott, I'm thinking a giant pretzel this time for obvious reasons. I'll leave it at that.
Pretzels work, and there's someone in Adelaide who there's lots of nautical imagery you can use, and there was a rum sponge with lots of nautical imagery on it that I really enjoyed, so I can see that working.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Maybe some sort of like pirate pretzel vibe. I don't know. I'm sure. Yeah, we'll get to it when the time comes. We'll do a good job.
Lederhosen and a pirate hat will be fine.
Yeah, I mean, any opportunity to get some Lederhosen vibes going on a label, I'm game.
Well, I think that's why we love the labels so much. But here's another segue for you. Speaking of cool labels, Ollie, if you've got a photo of the Sideburn, whiskey number 4. Honestly, the labels that you do are so cool. I just want to put them all up on my wall as artwork. But I think this is probably one of my favorite recent ones that you've done. You got it, Ollie, or do you need me to get it up?
I've got it. You keep talking, I'll put it up.
Okay. Yeah, this was also one of my favorite Probably maybe even in the top 10 favorite sponges. This is quite an interesting feet comparison on 85. Nice, good. Two great funky drams. That's the kind of feedback I like. So yeah, Sideburn edition 95 whiskey sponge. So this came about. So essentially, this whiskey is Burnside, which is a blended malt filled by Balvenie, William Grant and Sons. It's supposed to be Balvenie that's in it. And now we'll get to that in a minute, but it certainly tastes like Balvenie in my view. But the William Grant own the filling name Burnside. Burnside is also the name of a closed distillery in Campbelltown, and Springbank Distillery, Mitchell's, they own the trademarks to all the names of the closed distilleries in Campbelltown. Obviously, because of all the casks of closed Campbelltown distilleries, which are flooding the brokers' market these days. But we bottled a Burnside earlier in the year. I think it was like WhiskySponge 89 or something. We did a 96 Burnside, called it Burnside, and got an email from Springbank saying, hang on, we own the trademark to this. You can't use this. And I said, well, it must be very annoying sending this copy and paste email to these other 8 bottlers that have also bottled a Burnside this year. So wanting to stay on good terms with Springbank, because we occasionally have to move casks out of there, I said, very sorry, we won't use that name again. So we already had this bottling planned. So I thought, well, let's just call it Sideburn instead. So this is our new brand name for Burnside at Decadent Drinks, and you'll see more Sideburn bottlings coming up in the future because we've got a few nice examples of this liquid on our books. So this is a 1992 and a 1993. It's refill barrels, or a refill barrel and a first fill barrel. Can't remember, but it's in 2 barrels mixed together, married together, and bottled at natural marrying strength. 31 years old, although half of it be 32 years old, and I think it just tastes like 30-year-old Balvenie. I think it's just an absolute honey and fruit bomb, and I just love it. It's essentially a Balvenie 30-year-old with a 0 lopped off the price tag. And yeah, I would just bottle this all day long. I love this juice. And so the name Sideburn just made me think of the 70s. And so the inspiration for the label was, I spoke to my artist Can, said, can you do like a 1970s style album cover? Let's invent an album that the Sponge in the 70s would have done. And this is where all this, language and iconography around remixing and blending and all this stuff came in. And I wrote a track listing for the rear label. So it's a whiskey tasting note manifest as an imagined 1970s album track listing. With also like a bunch of drug references and stuff chucked in as well for fun. So yeah, the story behind Burnside is that it's supposed to be teaspooned Balvenie mixed with something else, and therefore a blended malt. I don't think that's what happens. I think that it is probably mostly just Balvenie, but I think on occasion it has been other things as well. This is the thing I've been told by people at William Grant, but no one that I've spoken to has been high up enough to know what those other things might be, what eras of Burnside might have been genuine blended malt versus what were just Balvenie filled and sold as blended malt in order to protect the brand name. It doesn't really matter anymore because that knowledge is out in the community. And so now people sort of autocorrect Burnside in their brain to Balvenie. And now hopefully I've managed to, make people autocorrect Sideburn to Balvenie. So yeah. I just think it's a really lovely dram. I was really delighted with how the mix of the 2 casks turned out. This is one of these bottlings where I think everything just came together. It was great liquid, a multi-vintage bit of blending that we like to do. So it's got a little bit of a Decadent Drinks spin on it. It's a very like Decadent Drinks label. I loved what we did with both sides of the labels, front and the rear, and it came out really well, and it's sold really well, and everyone that's tried it seems to have really enjoyed it. So this is the sort of bottling that gives me motivation to keep going and do more bottlings, and reminds me that there's still really good fun and success to be had in indie bottling.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible, and I look forward to all the future mutton chop variations of artwork that might come into the Sideburns. I think that
We
exploring
might just do different album covers every time. I don't know. We'll see.
that could be cool
I'll
as
think about it.
well. Yeah. Well, like I'm just thinking, one of my best friends has his lamb chops, his mutton chops, as we call them, refuses to get rid of them. So it's definitely a fashion statement. And yeah, I love that you incorporated that on the bottle. But the album covers, I think, would be really cool, like especially that, yeah, psychedelic 70s inspired. And then you could get like the hippie love vibes as well. Really cool. Justin had a great comment as well. He had a 30-year-old Balvenie at Tasmanian Whiskey Week, which I believe was last week, when Ross Blaney presented Tas versus Scotland, and he thought that that's what he was making right now. So that's pretty bang on.
Well, that's exactly the bottling that it reminds me of. Is whenever I tried Balvenie 30, which has been on a fair few occasions over the years, that's the flavor profile that immediately springs to mind when I tried this. First time we got out of the bottle, I thought, this is Balvenie 30. It's just yeah, much cheaper. So yeah, it's a success. It's a really good bottling, I think. And the sort of whiskey that I just love to drink for pleasure. Like this kind of very honey drenched, easy, softly waxy, rich, lovely mouthfeel, loads of different kind of quite bright fruit accents about it. That kind of profile, which I defy anyone in the world who likes whiskey to be against. I don't know how you could ever get like bored or kick this out of bed. It's a whiskey that I would just drink a large dram of for pleasure any day of the week.
100%. Got some great tasting notes as well. Michael Grassy had the notes on the palate, touch dry on the finish. Jason says a bit of artichoke as well, delicious. Green apples coming through, a bit of a cider vibe. I'm getting the cider vibe as well, like those old school English ciders. I think they call them Arfanav or something, or it's like a semi-sweetened cider. I can't quite recall. There's a few cideries that do it here in Australia, but another Michael Kutsuka's honey malt creamy vanilla, so rich and delicious. Tim hasn't had a lot of Balvenie, but he can definitely pick out that like creamy honey vanilla light fruit. Travis has got both this and the last Balvenie Sideburn Birdside. You did, and he said that was fantastic as well. So 2 bangers back to back. I think that last one,
the 96. The 96 was very good as well. That was I seem to remember that one being kind of a bit fuller and a bit spicier and a bit kind of heavier generally, but still within this kind of ballpark, very honeyed Balvenie beehive vibe. I would just like to do Burnside all the time. I'd like to almost have one as a kind of ongoing house product. Maybe we can just do like a Sideburn 30-year-old, make it a
Just the
core
core range of it, a 30-year-old just constantly.
Yeah.
Well, it's not entirely impossible. We could do that for a couple of years potentially with this. We've been lucky with supply on this. We found a rich seam of Sideburn that we've been able to tap. So hope to be able to tap it a little bit more before it dries up.
For those listening later, it's 51.4% ABV.
Yeah, it drinks so well. It's such a good yeah. It's cracking. It's just one of those whiskeys where you're like, I can sit and like experience it, or I can just sit and drink it at the same time. I don't have to think about it too hard, but if I do want to, there's so much there to take in. It's really, really cool. Well, I'm biased now because I am super, super, super duper excited. I've been hankering for this next whiskey to try because I know a lot of the guys in the chat know this is my hands down favorite distillery of all time being the last 5 years. But
it's not a peated version, right?
I don't care.
I think you're going to like it anyway. I mean, this is also one of my favorite things that we bottled recently. And we bottled a lot of good stuff recently. I think we've been very fortunate with a lot of what we've done this year. Um, but yeah, this is a second fill sherry butt of 1995 Ledaig, 29 years old, single cask, natural cask strength, 52% ABV, bang on. And we selected it as part 4 of our WhiskySponge series because I tend to think of like, so I think first of all it's got this big rugged full-bodied West Highland malt whiskey character. It's not peaty Ledaig, but it's not a light-footed whiskey. It's a big dram. And I think there's a wonderful, slightly salty aspect to it, which I think partly is really coming from the sherry character. It reminds me of like old Vorse Oloroso sherry, where you get that really bone dry, leathery, earthy, Serrano ham, bodega funk, this, walnut wine, all these magnificent sherry cask characteristics. And I think because it's a second fill butt that has had 29 years, it's obviously lent the whiskey very slowly, incrementally, a significant amount of sherry character, but has done it in a way which is, really stately in pace. And so you get this magnificent thing, which is so rare now, which is an old, well sherried, but still well balanced and still fresh and powerful whiskey. Um, and to me, it feels like a proper example of sherried island whiskey. And so for me, it was like perfect fit for WhiskySponge. So I was, really, really delighted with this cask. Didn't feel the need to do anything with it except bottle it as we found it. And it's just one of these ones I go back to constantly. And every time I do, I'm getting new aspects out of it. As it's one of these ones. What I think is driving that is that it's a whiskey which benefits from constant revisiting, having a dram on first neck pour, get that done, go back to it a week later, it'll be different, it'll have opened up more, and get another inch out the bottle, leave it for a few months, and it's just going to really start to open up and soften and become more complex and generous. When I was trying it again over the weekend, I was getting this like wonderful old balsamic note out of it, like this kind of sharp, tangy, very long aged balsamic vinegar vibe, along with these like pickled walnuts and that kind of salted Dutch licorice stuff like that. I just think these kind of characteristics are absolutely like diamonds when you find old sherry cask whiskies like this. And it's also interesting because Ledaig is obviously associated with peat, but Tobermory distillery in the 80s and 90s was very inconsistent in what it was producing in terms of peat levels. And a lot of the early 90s stuff is generally just unpeated, whether it's filled as Ledaig or Tobermory. This one, I don't know, there may have been a little bit of peat in there in the beginning, like it might be lightly peated malt originally, but that has really gone deep down in the mix now. But I think what you're left with is still, as I said before, a full-bodied, powerful kind of West Highland malt whiskey. So yeah, I hope you all enjoy it. I really love it. I love most of what we do. I try to not bottle things I don't like.
Yeah, usually that tends to work. This is like, I like this. Someone else must like it.
Cask was labeled Ledaig, just to answer that question that's come up in the chat. The Ledaig was actually the original filling name when Tobermory reopened in 72. They didn't fill anything labeled as Tobermory, I think, until it's 75. And all the production was peated from 72 through to 74. And it was really only later on that they started to differentiate. And it's only really been since 1997 that they became more disciplined in that differentiation. And Ledaig was peated, heavily peated, made down one side of the distillery. Tobermory was pretty much unpeated, made down the other side of the distillery.
Yep.
I was going to ask you, so it was 07 that Burn Stewart launched the Ledaig 10. So that's 10 years, 97. So that makes sense. They bought it in 93 or something like that from memory.
They were looking at it in 92, and then they got the keys in 93, I think it was, around there.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Would make
So
sense
this is a
because
95 distillate then.
yeah, it may be. It's the sort of situation where they may have not produced peated because in those years because they didn't feel they needed to. They probably didn't buy it and have a clear idea of exactly what it was for, other than this will be useful for certain blends, or it'll take the heat off Bunnahabhain a bit, or something like that. And the red box and blue box 20 and 15-year-olds coming out were from much older stock, which is why those releases can be intermittently peaty at different levels. Some of the old red box Ledaig 20-year-olds are magnificent drams. I think they contained older whiskey in the later years. Yeah, so interesting comments coming through. Edgedour. Yeah, I sort of get what you mean with the Edgedour thing. Although this is, well, I wouldn't say anything actually.
I do find Edgedour, particularly in sherry cask, tends to go down that similar meaty, bacony kind of thing. But then if you get like the Balakin in bourbon cask, it gets this mushroom vibe funk to it, which is really interesting. This is so cool, so good. It's got this like Singaporean char siu pork thing on the nose, that like sticky sweet pork fatty thing. But then like the more I shove my nose into it, the more it's like there's a cherry ripe behind there. It's got this like cherry ripe, definitely the balsamic as well, like a raspberry balsamic glaze kind of thing to it as well. This is phenomenal. I mean, look, I liked the edition, what is it? Edition 70.
Yeah.
As well. That was much more like Chinese five spice. This is much the palate's a lot softer than the nose belies, I think, as well. Which I really like. And natural cask strength of 52%.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
No, it's a really good, like almost like perfect natural strength for a whiskey that age. It's almost a shame we couldn't wait longer and get it to 30, but yeah. Yeah, no, I loved the Ledaig edition 70 as well. And again, that's even more extreme because it's so peaty and also so sherried, and a different story to that one really. But one day we should definitely try and do a tasting of, like, I don't know, the most extreme whiskies that Decadent Drinks have bottled, or just a tasting that contains those two Ledaigs and do them side by side. Because they're really they're great examples of the different eras, and they're both lovely sort of sherried examples of Ledaig. I'm also pretty chuffed with this Westie Sponge series and the way it's gone. I really like, obviously, the reason we did it is just that I'm a West Coaster, and it's the bit of Scotland that I kind of call sort of spiritually home. So I wanted to kind of celebrate that and focus on West Highland malts, which I think often get a little bit overlooked in some respects. So we've done this Westie Sponge 4, which we've still got a bit of stock of, and then there's coming the final Westie Sponge 5, which is a Ben Nevis 1998, and that'll be out end of this month. And that's another great Ben Nevis, just totally off the other end of the spectrum to the 2013. It's all about, obviously much older, but really like just oils and waxes and minerals and fruits and cereals. It's going to be very, very good.
Yeah,
Angus,
amazing.
I was going to ask, I realized once we started, there's obviously a lot of people here who've never missed a tasting with you, but there's a few people who are joining for the very first time. So maybe a very quick overview of like who is Decadent Drinks and all the brands that sit underneath it, and why does it matter, basically?
Yeah, so Decadent Drinks is our company. We're an independent bottler. We've been going just over 5 years now, and essentially in that time we focused on WhiskySponge as our main series, and that we did WhiskySponge, and we did sub-series like Cognac Sponge, Armagnac Sponge, Rum Sponge, which for our different spirits that we do, we as a bottler think it's important to diversify and do more than just whiskey. We like to do lots of different spirits. And we've also done a side series that you tried at the start of the tasting called Equinox and Solstice, which we do is our like accessible priced, easy day-to-day drinker series, and it's themed around the seasons. We do 4 bottlings of that a year, and they're each released on their respective Equinox or Solstice date in the season. And we've also done some other series. So we did a series called Notable Age Statements for a while, which we've just pretty much stopped doing now. We've done a series, and we've done a brand, which we're going to keep doing in the future, called Old Orkney, which is a historic brand that we bought back and sort of reinvented a little bit. And that houses very specifically interesting Highland parks whenever we can find them, because I love the brand, I love the imagery, I love the iconography, I love Highland Park. So going forward into the future, we've just kind of reached a point where we're about to finish our WhiskySponge series, because I don't want to do the same thing forever. We've done it for 5 years. I don't want to do it in perpetuity and for it to become tired or stale. I think it's really important for a company that puts creativity at the heart of what it does to refresh every so often and set itself new challenges, demonstrate that they can keep on being creative in new ways, not be a one-trick pony, not do the same thing forever. So we've reached edition 100 of WhiskySponge, and all these various other little sponge series. The Spongiverse, as I call it, is essentially complete now. There's one or two stragglers that'll come out over the course of this year, but it's essentially finished. And we've now changed things up a bit, and we're going to do a couple of new brands going forward. One of which is our main flagship series we just announced last week, called Whiskeyland. So Whiskeyland is really, the way to think about that is the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but for whiskey. And Whiskeyland is our culture, our whiskey sort of community and world that we all inhabit, just reflected back to us through classic Decadent Drinks, sort of satirical, fun, surreal label artworks, original artworks. And it's going to be a home for our very best whiskies that we can find. So top end single casks and small batches. And I'll give you an example. The first two bottlings are a Springbank 98 and a Bamor 2004. And that kind of sets the pace for how we mean to continue. Finally, the next brand we're about to introduce in September is going to be our new kind of bread and butter brand going forward. It's going to be called Decadent Drams, and it's a home for all our spirits. It's for whiskies under about £350. It's for rums, cognacs, armagnacs, Calvados, everything else we can find in bottle. And that's going to be a really diverse, broad series. It's going to be driven again by really creative original artworks, and those artworks and that branding is going to take a very flexible approach from bottling to bottling and be, quite a broad spectrum of kind of imagery and styles and inspirations. So you can see more of these, and the next time we're together we'll probably be tasting some of these. So yeah, that's where we are, the sort of state of the nation as it is with Decadent Drinks at this kind of quite critical point for us. So yeah, hopefully you get to try lots of these new bottlings. We've got a lot of really good stuff lined up for the rest of this year and into next year now. I finally got a bottling plan that goes all the way to March, just about. So lots of nice things coming up.
I look forward to whatever 42 is going to be.
Oh, yeah. Proper Hitchhiker's reference.
That's a very good point.
Should it come with a free towel? Because you shouldn't go anywhere without your towel.
Well, we could really drill into the Hitchhiker's stuff on 42 and try and come up with like a branded towel packaging or something. We'll leave that one with me. I'll let that percolate a while. We've got a while for 42. My view of this kind of rebranding, relaunch thing is that Sponge has done us for 5 years, and these new brands will do us for the next 5 years. And then that'll give me enough time to think of what on earth we should do after that. And I think it serves a certain neatness for us as a company. It also reflects the nature of the supply we can get. These brands are yeah, nice. Sorry, I'm just reading this comment from Scott. These brands essentially are designed to be homes for the sort of whiskies we can buy, and it'll help us be a bit neater in terms of how we release things as a company. But the same principles behind what we do, fun, original artworks, creativity, all that stuff is still going to be there. And hopefully the things that people liked about what we've done so far, they'll still find those qualities in what we do next. So there's a bunch of questions here. I should probably read. Are Sideburn and WestíSponge two of your favorite bottlings you've done? tough to say because I'm fond of so many of our bottlings. It's really challenging. I don't really have a good answer to this. What's my favorite that we've done? Because it sort of changes around a lot of the time. So yeah, there's my cop out answer there. You know, this usual thing that people like me say, oh, they're all my children, blah blah blah. But they are a bit all my children. Um, Logically good comments here. Any chance of using foil labels with a low stick adhesive that are easy to remove and keep? Oh,
Leo,
yes. This
my
idea of doing something with our labels, like a book or something, this has been raised various times by different people, and it's something that we will probably start to look at the end of this year once the Sponge series is finally ended. I think there's 207 sponges, all in all, total. But there's maybe one or two exclusives that are coming this in the next few months that are gonna disrupt that. So by the end of December, there will be absolutely no more sponges. Anything after that, any exclusives, things like that, after that time period will be all decadent drams. And I think there's three more bottlings that'll be Sponge branded over the next few months coming out as main releases, which are kind of just they've just taken too long to get them out in time. And after that, it really will be finito. And at that point, we might look at doing a big book or something. Maybe. It depends. Depends on how much time and effort it takes to do it at a level of quality where I would be satisfied that we've done a good job. I'm not going to change the paper stock on the labels because I don't want them to be easy to remove. Because if something, yeah, that
secondary
raises
markets and stuff.
problems in other ways.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that when we designed this series, the idea was that if people, they hopefully loved the whiskey, and they could keep the bottle if they wanted as a memento to keep the labels and things like that. But yes, I understand the desire to want to peel labels. I'm sorry, our labels are not more peelable.
Well, I've chatted to a few people who've become like experts because I've got some artist collective labels that I want to do the same with. And I know some people, Leo, I'll see if we can just like, if there is a way. I know that some people saturate the labels with stuff, but yeah, look, if I do end up finding a way, it's just for you because I know you're just going to turn them into a book. You're not going to do anything dodgy with them. But we may as well, speaking again of all of the incredible sub branches, and sorry, Michael and Abe, I'm very excited that you guys are on your first sponge journey, your first Decedent Drinks journey, attending this tasting. Hopefully you've enjoyed. I think we've had quite a few people super keen. I think Michael Ledaig really opened up with a left-in glass. Yes, I was draining every single drop that was left in my glass. But we should probably move on to the final whiskey of the evening. Edition number 6 in the IslaySponge series, the Caol. I think the goal with this is to IslaySponge is to try and bottle every single Islay distillery at some point.
In fact, this is the one caveat I might make to everything I just said, which is that if we find a Portellin or a Lagavulin, named or otherwise, that's the one thing I might be tempted to do, would be to tick off some final Islay sponges. Yeah, it was really just an excuse to explore and celebrate and have fun with Islay as a theme, because I love Islay. I started my kind of whiskey journey there. Obviously another sort of bastion of West Highlands, West Coast, and it's got a special place in my heart. So we started this series, and I just thought, as we find examples from the relevant distilleries, we'll do this IslaySponge series. And actually, it's been pretty successful. We've managed to get 6 now, and they're all the kind of lower hanging fruit. Like, I think it's going to be a long haul to go from Kalila to now go to get Kilchoman, and Port Ellen and Lagavulin, and we might get an Ardnahoe eventually. I don't know. We'll see. So yeah, that's IslaySponge, and this is IslaySponge 6. So Kalila, it's a multi-vintage Kalila, so it's another combination small batch, and it's a 2010 first fill sherry hogshead married with a 2009 second fill sherry hogshead. And the ethos behind IslaySponge is just to bottle really good examples of those distilleries. Kalila is a distillery which is like it would be more of a challenge to bottle a bad Kalila than a good Kalila. Um, there's so much good Kalila out there. So I wanted to try and do something that was a little bit different. And in my view, the only thing you can really do with Kalila that makes it slightly different is to go with sherry, because I think Kalila and sherry do work. But I wanted something that had a lot of distillery character. So these bottlings we do as IslaySponge have to be super like have to be super forward on distillery character, because it's meant to be like natural celebrations of each distillery. So I decided to do this one, which was just like a nice multi-vintage with a gentle influence of sherry, not too extreme. So we took that mix, reduced it to 53%, which is a reduction of about 3.5 degrees. And that was what you're drinking now. 13-year-old IslaySponge Kalila, half of it being 14-year-old, and with a lovely dusting of sherry.
It's one of those things, like you put sherry anywhere near a Caol and it's just like, oh, I'm there, I'm excited. It's and it does surprisingly well in red wine cask as well, I find. More so than some of the other Islay distilleries.
If you say so.
Very anti. Hey, that Caol Hermitage cask from Gordon and MacPhail, I think it was 13-year-old. Was great. But it's a long gone bottle, and yeah, I'm sad it stock up when I did. It's probably my favorite. Michael's saying an Octomore sponge would be awesome.
I mean, if we got an Octomore, I wouldn't do it under IslaySponge, because we've already done one from Bruichladdich, and I'm not getting into the distillates named side of it. I thought we've done a Port Charlotte that was amazing. That is Bruichladdich ticked off the list. Because otherwise Bruichladdich will just dominate the entire series if I try and do a Bruichladdich and a Lochandal and if we find an Octomore that's good, 100% up for bottling it. The chances of us finding an Octomore are pretty minimal. Like they're just, I don't know. You never say never, but I think it's unlikely. We've just bottled a really good pair of bottlings, Jura 94 and Bruichladdich 2005. I thoroughly recommend you have a try of them. They're another sort of themed approach around islands and the West Coast, but it's done via the main Sponge series, just 2 single casks. So yeah, WhiskySponge 96 and 97.
Yeah, cool. Ollie brought up a really interesting one, because I know the guys at Kilchoman refuse to allow independent bottling. So that might perpetually leave IslaySponge in a state of never ending.
IslaySponge will never be complete, because by the time I find a Kilchoman, there'll have been like 3 new distilleries started on the island, and I just won't be able to keep up. I'm okay with that. You know, I had thought the one thing I thought about doing was buying like 50 or 60 bottles of old Port Ellen at auction and marrying them together in a demijohn, and then bottling that as an IslaySponge Port Ellen. But I'm not sure what the view of that in the wider community would be. I think people might think I was just cheating. And I also wonder if Diageo might tell me off. I don't know. I'm not dead against doing it. I love the idea of doing it. It's going to be really fun. I'm just not sure what view people would take on it. Might get criticized for it, which I don't care about, but I'm not sure myself what I would think of it. So
it's that thing of like, I don't care, but also like, I should probably not piss people off too much.
Not even that. It's just like, is it a fun thing to do? Like, if I was just doing it for myself, yes, it would be a fun thing to do. But if I did it in a sort of quite public way and sold it, what are the optics on that? Is that like pushing the boundaries of indie bottling a bit too far? We'll see. I'm not sure. But I've got bigger things to be getting on with at the moment than garage, Portel, and blending projects, sadly.
Next
Fair
virtual tasting, I haven't run this past anyone, but it will be the last few bottles of Whisky Sponge, and then we're probably going to include the first bottle of Whiskey Land in there as well. So it's going to be a bit of a transition period between A to B. So Angus will reach out when we're ready to do that one, but that's what I'm thinking for the next one.
Sounds great.
It could be a nice little farewell to Sponge. But while the poll is running as well, I think we've still got a few more people to answer. I believe you can vote for your top 2 picks, so you don't have to restrict it to just one, but your top 2 picks. Meanwhile, I believe I have a code, Ollie. Yes? He's smiling and nodding. Yes, sweet. I can share it. We have a few. I think we've like kept back one of a couple of these bottles at the very least for this tasting. So if you click the link, we've got a 20% off either me, because if Ollie says it's from him, he'll get in trouble with Chris. So I'm taking the blame now. So we've got 20% off all the sponges, Decedent Drinks, all the fun stuff we've got.
Yeah, I've just published. We're holding back a couple bottles of 1 Sideburn, 2 Ledaigs, 2 Deanston. So I've kept back a couple bottles just for this tasting. So
yeah,
we'll release them to the public tomorrow if no one's keen tonight. So
get first dibs. So yeah, I think we got. Oh, I think everyone's answered the poll. Have they? I don't know. You're better at this techie stuff than I am, Ollie. I will say, probably not a surprising result, but I think I might finish it and share it with everyone. So drum roll for absolutely no surprise whatsoever. The Sideburn and the Ledaig came out in front. Really thrilled to see that the Sideburn took the lead. I think it's just that I don't know if anyone else remembers the ad that we had in Australia, the milk ad, where it's like, do you want no fat, low fat, 2%, whatever? I just want milk that tastes like real milk. I feel like this Sideburn 31 is just like, I just want Balvenie that tastes like Balvenie, you know? Just really, really beautiful. And the Ledaig, yeah, I'll be having small driblets at a time to savor every last drop of this. But yeah, oh no, Sam, the poll didn't pop up for you, but I mean, the Sideburn was your pick anyway as well for number 1. So yeah, I think absolutely far and away. If a core 30-year-old Sideburn is on the cards in the future, it might be worth it.
I think it's more likely there'll be small batch, intermittent, ongoing bottlings under the Sideburn name coming your way. I don't think you'll be disappointed. I think in a few months' time we might have a 96 and 94 multi-vintage at some point soon. So keep your eyes peeled for that one.
That's super exciting. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight. I think that wraps it up. We've had some absolutely spectacular whiskies. I think even like thinking back on the early ones always struggle a bit because they get overpowered by the excitement of the rest of the range. But yeah, absolutely incredible whiskies tonight. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to the guys who came along for the first time. Hopefully we'll see you at more Decedent Drinks virtuals or others. And to the usual suspects, Michael, Leo, Ian, Karen. Good to see you again. We'll catch you in the next one. Have a great night, everyone. Angus, if you want to stay on a little bit longer.
Thanks very much for having me. It's always great fun to do these things. So it's, yeah, and much appreciated. Thank you all for coming along.
Thank you so much, guys. And Scott, I suppose.